Hi, my name is Roy Delbyck, and I live in Hong Kong, where I have my own law firm. I practice in the customs and trade area, but when I am not lawyering, I am collecting all sorts of historical memorabilia, typically paper, letters, diaries, maps, programs, city guides, you name it. And this madness overcame me about 12 years ago. And I started off with a pretty simple proposition. I wanted to buy books initially about the West in China. But over the course of time, I'd say my interests morphed or mutated a little bit. I think it's the same with most collectors. And I became most interested in what I would call the beating heart of things, personal objects which kind of fall under the general nomenclature, ephemera, things that were not intended to last but somehow did. And things kept rolling along, and I really started focusing on the 20th century, particularly the Republic of China era from 1911 to 1949. And within that, of course, if you're collecting about the Republic of China, you can't help but collect things about Chiang Kai-shek and Madame Chiang Kai-shek, two extremely consequential figures in the ROC's history. I didn't realize that I had so much stuff that related to the Chiangs until I started toting it up, because a friend of mine told me that there was going to be a commemoration of Madame Chiang to coincide with the 20th anniversary of her death. She died in October 2003, so it will be next month, October 2023. So I started looking at the stuff I had, and voila, it turned out to be quite a few things. So I'm now sitting in Taiwan, in Taipei, and I have brought with me some of the things I have about the Madame's life, starting from her very, very early days until her death some 20 years ago. And it is going to be, I understand, part of an online exhibition that will begin on the 23rd of next month. The sponsoring foundation is Fu Lianhui, which I understand that she founded in 1950. So if we're talking about the kinds of things that I brought to Taiwan, I think we should try to do it somewhat chronologically. We start at the beginning. In her case, 1898, I can't say I go that far back. The earliest thing I have of her is a picture when she was about 10 years old, so that would be about 1908. And then we move to a catalog of the McTyre School, which I'm probably botching the pronunciation of in Shanghai, McTyere. And this is a 1910 catalog of McTyre. I believe she stopped attending in 1908 when she moved to Georgia in the US to join her sisters. But the catalog is instructive because it was issued at a time when I'm sure many of her classmates were still there. But it really shows, I think, in the ethos of the school, the DNA that was probably imprinted on her in terms of ethic, discipline, certainly her Christian faith. And then we go on in terms of time, because I wanted to bring a few objects that kind of frame the era. Because when Madame Chiang first went to the US in 1908 or thereabouts, it wasn't the friendliest place in terms of receiving Chinese people. So I have something that I brought, which is the Bureau of Immigration, or whatever the name of the US Immigration Agency was, talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act, which of course was an act that kept out Chinese to a large extent and was still in force until about 1943, a pretty black mark on the history of the United States. So she gets to the US in 1908, and then I guess in around 1913 or 1914, she goes to Wellesley in Wellesley, Massachusetts, a very highly regarded all-girls school, which continues in great strength today. Hillary Clinton went there about 30, 40 years ago. So with respect to her Wellesley experience, I have the 1917 Wellesley yearbook, which is called the Legenda, Legenda. And it's interesting because when you find the picture of Madame Chiang Kai-shek, it says Mei-ling soon, and it lists her address in Shanghai, which we're going to be verifying, but it also lists her middle name, her middle initial, O period. And that was kind of a head scratcher for me. I went, oh, what, O? I never recall seeing an O name, O beginning name associated with her. And I called up the Wellesley archivist, and she said that the O stood for Olive. Apparently that was the English name that she was given at Wellesley. And then we move on a little bit to the 20s. I mean, her life was so broad and so detailed, any collector could only collect only a glimpse of it. So I'm not professing any deep coverage of her entire life, but hopefully there are themes that come through. And of course she was married at the Majestic Hotel, I believe, in 1927. And while I would love to say that I had a wedding invitation, I don't. But one of the things that I'm bringing is a Christmas menu from the Majestic in 1928. And then there's a picture of her as still a rather young woman. I think 1929, she's inspecting the troops, and she just looks so unburdened, I think is the word that I would use, as she sort of jauntily marches in front of these troops. And the picture, I think, quite captures that. And then we move into the 30s, and I'm skipping a few items. And the 30s, of course, is a much more burdened era because of all the things, that happened to her, that happened to her husband. But there are some things about the New Life movement, which of course she was the spiritual mother or godmother of, and her husband's capture in Xi'an in Christmas, I believe, 1936. One of the items that I brought with me was the Good Friday speech, I guess it would be March 1937, that her husband gave to I think the Wesley Memorial Church in Nanking in 1937, in which he talks about the experience of being captured and then, I think, to his surprise, of escaping death. So one of the things that I associate with Madame Chiang is, of course, her love of education. From what I understand, her vocabulary was absolutely, ginormous. And she was a big supporter of the Christian colleges. I think there were 13 Christian colleges, which were under supervision of an organization based in New York. And of those 13, I think I have the number right, and it includes Yanqing, St. John's, University of Shanghai. There were two all-girls schools. One was Huanan in Fuzhou, I think, and the other, of course, the most famous of all, was Jinling. And one of the things that I brought was a postcard which features a bunch of college students from Jinling, and I think, although I've never had it verified, that Wei-han, the head of Jinling, is in the middle of the postcard. The postcard is probably from the 1920s, and it talks about, I think the line on the postcard is "making China safe." And you look at that postcard and you understand what the architect of that postcard was getting at, because Jinling was supposed to produce this new Chinese woman, I think, who Madame Chiang exemplified. Not only strong in mind, but also strong in body. Athletics, PE were extremely strong at Jinling. But then, of course, you just want to start almost crying. Sorry, I'm an emotional collector. When you think about what that line, "making China safe," meant in December 1937, January 1938, during the invasion of Nanking and the rape and the barbarism that followed, where Jinling became a sanctuary for Chinese women to try to escape the depredations that were being committed by the Japanese. And then, of course, we have the Marco Polo Bridge and World War II starting, although I think World War II started sometime before, September 18th, 1931, with the Manchuria incident. I would say kind of the heart of what I brought really has to do with World War II and Madame Chiang's role as a spokesperson for the Chinese people, keeping alive the hope of the Chinese people as they fought. And this is just something that you can never say enough, as the Chinese people fought for 4 years alone. I mean, let's remember that the Marco Polo Bridge incident was, June 6, 1937 or thereabouts, and it wasn't until, December 8th, at least in Asia, 1941, that the US and other people joined the war, other countries joined the war in Asia. So I brought a lot of objects, buttons, pins, donation slips, regarding United China Relief, that is the relief organization that was set up pre-December 7th, 1941, probably went for some time thereafter, where people in the US were making all kinds of donations and contributions to China's cause. And then, of course, we have the Flying Tigers, of which Madame Chiang was the honorary chairperson. And although probably everybody listening knows who the Flying Tigers were, I'll just repeat what you already know, and that is the Flying Tigers were essentially an off-the-book organization of pilots, personnel, mechanics, etc. I think about 200, who took Curtiss-Wright aircraft that were initially going to be given to the Brits. I think Franklin Roosevelt redirected the aircraft to China. This is all hush-hush, because this is at a time where the US and Japan were not officially at war. And these 200 were led by Claire Chennault, who is an inspiring figure and worth, a whole museum. And maybe he does have a whole museum in Louisiana just for his exploits. So what I have with respect to the Flying Tigers is a couple of ID cards with pictures of members of the Flying Tigers. I think Carl Quick and John Overly, that feature a picture and Chennault's signature. I also have an original copy of the internal Flying Tiger newsletter, because they got started officially on December 8th, 1941, but this newsletter is December 1941, the very day, and it basically says, the game is on. And then there's a very early accident report showing what had happened, what had transpired in terms of damage to planes and pilots over the first month of the war. And then there's another accident report which was issued later in June 1942. I also have a contract for one of the pilots. I think he was a group wing something, which is the pilot that was, the contract that was signed between each Flying Tiger member and the sponsoring sort of cover organization, CAMCO, Central American Manufacturing Corporation, which was the brainchild, I believe, of TV Sung and I forget who in the US government. And I think the centerpiece of what I brought when it comes to Flying Tiger stuff is an invitation from Madame Chiang and Claire Chennault to President Lin's, I think it was President Lin's villa in Chungking to celebrate July 4th, 1942. And there is irony here because July 4th, 1942 is actually the day that the Flying Tigers were officially disbanded and rolled into, the U.S. Army Air Corps. So going on in terms of the World War II things and some things that are specific to Madame Chiang, my understanding is that they traveled twice together, that is, outside China during World War II. The first time was in 1942 to India, and I have a program which is a kind of like a menu or a seating chart of the reception at the Viceroy's palace or whatever in India, and you see a lot of interesting people noted, in the seating chart. And then there is an extremely laudatory book about Madame Chiang that was published in Lahore in 1942, probably coincident with her trip to India. And the title is Madame Chiang, and then you flip to the title page and it says World's Greatest Woman, Madame Chiang. So it's kind of cute. Also, I brought with me some menus of Chinese restaurants that opened, that existed in India during this time. And I guess the reason for that is if you follow the highs and lows of the theater, the China, Burma, India CBI theater, when Stilwell got beaten in Burma and walked out of Burma in, I guess, 42, 43, Stilwell's troops, which included, I think, thousands of ROC soldiers, ended up in India. So wherever there are Chinese people, I think there are going to be, Chinese restaurants. And then we move to the second trip that Madame Chiang and Chiang Kai-shek made together outside of China. And that brings us to the Cairo Conference in 1943, of course, in Cairo. And there's the famous picture, I didn't bring it, it's fairly common, of Madame Chiang, Chiang Kai-shek, Roosevelt, and Churchill sitting together in Cairo. But what I brought was a very interesting cloth, almost the size of a big handkerchief or scarf, which was produced in Russia. It shows Stalin to celebrate the conference and all of the other participants. Of course, Stalin didn't show up. The cloth is pretty interesting. I think it's made of rayon. And then I also have a seating name card which says Madame Chiang Kai-shek, and together with a security booklet about the Cairo conference and the name card of one of Roosevelt's, or ID card of one of Roosevelt's bodyguards. And then I think I may have gone out of order here a little bit because I believe sandwiched between Cairo and India, but I was only talking about trips that they both made. So in a sense I didn't go out of order, but chronologically speaking, of course there is the trip that Madame Chiang made to the US. I think she also went to Canada for many, many months in 1943. And I was lucky enough to obtain, something like 200 photos that were compiled by someone who was with her on the trip, one of her aides. So these are press photos, some personal photos, and they're really great because you get to see her at least in some of the photos, in a less than perfect light, because she always looks so kind of manicured and whatever. So the photos cover all of the stops that she made, including the stop in DC where she spoke before Congress. Then I believe she went to New York, then she went up to Wellesley to revisit her old college, then on to Chicago, and then to San Francisco, and then to Los Angeles. The photos are particularly strong when it comes to San Francisco and also Los Angeles. And Los Angeles, of course, is worth a special mention because there was a celebration essentially that was held for her at the LA Coliseum. And there was a march or some piece of music that was produced, and all of the Hollywood luminaries came out. And there had been a lot of support, I think, in Hollywood for China before Madame Chiang's trip there. And you look at this and you're just astounded that this person could command this sort of turnout, at that time. I think it was something like 20 to 30,000 people. And, we've seen the shot of her sitting in, I'm not saying it was a rocking chair, but I think like an Adirondack chair, in the Coliseum. But one of the shots that I have and that I brought, I think is super cool. It shows this empty stage, and there are two actors on the stage who are at a lectern. And one of them is Henry Fonda speaking to the audience, and to his right is Spencer Tracy. You see these photos and you just go, wow. I think that's the only reaction. I also have a ticket from her address in Madison Square Garden. I think another ticket from an address in Chicago, a letter from the then mayor of New York City, Fiorello LaGuardia, telling somebody, you better show up early tomorrow because there's going to be a traffic jam or something like that. So I would say that is the core of what I'm bringing. And you think today, these troubled times between Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, you name it. But I think there can be no doubt that what she stood for, the hope that she brought, the message that she brought, particularly, not just for the Chinese people, but on behalf of all the orphan kids that she called, I don't know if she labeled the term warphans, just to keep fighting the Japanese. That's a spirit and a message. It's not just limited to the people in Taiwan, it's the people in China, it's the people in Hong Kong. I think it's this universal embodiment of just courage. And then the items that I brought go on. Few things from the late 40s, a visit with Truman, the 50s, and then of course Eisenhower's trip to Taiwan in 1960. I have a special supplement to the China Post. And it ends with, of course, her passing. And there's a deck of cards, which is a pretty commonplace thing, that was issued to honor her life. I guess it was put out sometime in the early 2000s. So all in all, an amazing, consequential life. And I'm happy to bring whatever stuff I had over to Taiwan so people can share in it. That's about it for me.